before, so I think we're going to get started. Thank you everyone for joining us today. We have a very interesting topic today. Trina Patton is going to be talking to us about operationalizing data privacy in today's landscape. That's a tough word for me. So thank you very much, Trina, for joining us today. Trina is a consultant. She consults with both corporate and law firm clients in the areas of e-discovery, data governance, and privacy. She's also a drafting team leader for Sedona Conference Working Group 1 commentary on managing e-discovery in small cases. And she was also the chapter director for the Charlotte chapter of Women in E-Discovery. Trina is also a certified information privacy management professional and is very well equipped to speak with us today about this topic. I think it should be really interesting. So thank you, Trina.
Thanks, Lauren. So we'll kind of jump right in with getting started because we're talking about quite a bit that we could easily spend more than an hour on each topic, but I hope that everyone is able to walk away with at least one takeaway that's beneficial for your day-to-day. And so kind of want to start with, and don't worry, there's not going to be a lot of audience questions throughout, but to just kind of start us off, how would you describe the current data privacy landscape? If you could use one word, what one word would you choose? And don't worry, there's not one right answer. But if there's anything that you would use to describe it, feel free to include it in the chat. Complicated, yes, that is probably my top choice as well. Yes, fragmented, very much. And I'm also a visual person, and so DLA Piper has a heat map on their site that kind of shows data privacy landscape, and it looks complicated and it looks fragmented. So those are definitely spot on words to use to describe it. You'll also see here that I pulled this map on October 11th. Every time I go to the site, the map looks different. I get, daily morning alerts. I'm having my coffee and I get, kind of the privacy news of the day. But I like to pop in and see this visual kind of change over time. And every time I go to the site, which I don't go on a daily basis or anything, it does look different. So it's just interesting to see how it changes. And then with this kind of complication of, there's not one single regulation, there's not one single standard. What do we do from a compliance perspective to satisfy our requirements? And so that's what we're going to talk about today, kind of how to navigate it in today's landscape, especially for global organizations that's looking at compliance in a regulation that is very fragmented. So we have kind of a fragmented regulatory state in privacy that, is shown here kind of in the outer loop of kind of the alphabet soup of privacy regulations that's then compounded even more so with the amount of data that is ever growing and exploding and is not going to look to probably start reducing unless we do things to make those kind of reduction and changes. And also then the data types is ever evolving. So you've got increases in volume, but then also changes in data types that see more and more of those changes today than in years past, and would say, this includes examples, but not even all of them. IoT with Internet of Things and all of the listening devices that folks have have at home and now in their workplaces, a lot more of audio and video as well, with much more of a remote workforce and lifestyle, with seeing those items come up more and more, where people may have gone into a store or a branch or something of that to talk about maybe more personal items and those kinds of things that now are always recorded when they dial in, or on the online chat, interacting then with customers in that capacity. So there's just a lot of different areas that can really complicate then this space. So we're not going to solve all of those items today, but broke it down into probably the 7 themes, and this isn't even all of the themes whenever it comes to managing a privacy program, but these are probably the ones that are top of mind with organizations that speak to, and that kind of also go to just the varied state of privacy compliance today as well. Like one example that's not on here is your privacy policy and notice, and those different things. So this by no means is an exhaustive list. So first, we're going to look at kind of data assessments. So think of this as your data map, your data inventory. I know it's not exciting when working on that project, but we're going to talk about how it's a little bit different today and how it's evolved over time with a lens on privacy. Cookie management and what exactly then that means. And while we're not going to focus on any one particular regulation or go through all of them, the nuances of cookie management in regulations, we are going to talk about kind of how you could implement cookie management when you are looking at having to comply with potentially competing regulations in how they want cookies to be managed in their jurisdiction. Data subject rights, training and awareness programs on the lens of privacy, protecting personal information, data breach incident plans. This really goes with the protecting personal information in terms of your information security and IT group, and the proactiveness of wanting to prevent a data breach, but having that plan in place so that you know what the requirements are and how you're going to be able to handle those for if and when a breach occurs, so that's after there's been that legal decision that it is in fact a data breach. And then the monitoring and auditing of a staple in any corporate program, but kind of how you might be able to go about doing it from a privacy perspective. And also feel free to ask questions along the way. If so, you can use the chat or I believe you have also the ability to unmute, but feel free to ask throughout, or you can ask at the end. But I want to make sure I mention that. So data assessments, what kind of exactly does that mean, especially from a privacy perspective? So, it's looking at your data map. You need to know where your data is to be able to answer a lot of the items that are required from a privacy regulation perspective. So you first want to know what type of data is collected. You have the various definitions of what is personal data and personal information from a regulation specific requirement. Then once you know that, are you collecting any of that data? If you are, where is it stored? Who then has access to it? Do folks have access to it that may not necessarily have a business need for it and need to then limit the access for that particular data type. Who's also then responsible for it? You're going to have then your IT and security folks that are responsible for that particular data asset or application, but then also the business owners that then would be able to help answer the question of why are you collecting or processing that data, and are you disclosing it to any third party with, who is it shared with? And so we're going to then take a look at kind of how that has evolved over time. There are then quite a bit of screenshots in here. And we're going to look at different technologies to try to then make this as practical as possible in kind of PowerPoint and Zoom, but it's by no means a training also. But with that, if you are on a smaller screen, apologies if it's harder to see. You will afterwards though receive a copy of the deck as well. But this first example is, kind of what you would think of as a retention schedule back in the day, where you would classify your different categories of records. You would describe it and how long would you retain it. So this is just a snapshot of some of the records that would be obtained for an accounting and finance department, and then what the regulatory requirements were for keeping that data, accounts payable 7 years and the like. Whereas today, data maps and assessments have evolved much more in terms of the detail of information about a particular asset or application, and where that data is and what information is contained within it. So these examples are in the OneTrust platform. If you're not familiar with OneTrust, I would say it's the leading technology in privacy program management. This being ACEDS, think of it a bit like Relativity in e-discovery, whereas OneTrust probably has much more of even a larger market whenever it comes to privacy technology than even Relativity, where it really is most organizations utilize it in some form. And in looking at their data map item, the one on the left side, the data lineage, is really looking at the flow of data, which is very much important whenever it comes to privacy, and looking at, are you collecting in data from employees, customers, what individuals are you collecting in that data from, and then where does it go? So let's say you collect data from a customer and they are utilizing your app on their iPhone, and you get things like their name and address and what they've purchased and things of that nature. But then for you to complete that transaction, it connects within different internal systems that the customer doesn't interact with, the shipping partner, the folks that are in the warehouse and collecting the goods, all of these different applications that may then be utilized internally. And then as it then flows through those different applications, what then happens with the data? Is it eventually archived or deleted? And if so, at what point in time? And it can get even more complicated, where I've seen some organizations that they have some of that information, like your name and address and what you purchased and the like, but then they have some that is more sensitive, like photos and things like that. And it may then have, since that's getting more in the facial recognition stage of having then certain data, they will then delete some of the data earlier than other data that no longer has kind of that business need and purpose for retaining it. And then with privacy regulations, you then want to look at, is this data then shared with any applications or third parties that has the potential of a cross-border transfer? So you really want to then look at, if you have all of these applications that are in the cloud, where are those cloud servers at? Are you inadvertently sending something that is inputted in one jurisdiction to another? So this is looking at, you gather all that information about what data you have, where's it located, what's your retention schedule on it, what's it used for then completing your records of processing activities and the like. You then want to take a look at it visually as well to really see how it's all interconnected within one another. So also added, and I would say this is probably the first time that spoke on this kind of general topic that really talked about Microsoft. And that's because just in October, so earlier this month, Microsoft rolled out with general availability their privacy module within their 365 compliance center. So we're taking a look then at some of those items, but admittedly we'll say, from an implementation and use perspective, I personally haven't worked then with Microsoft 365 privacy in the compliance center with clients near as much as I have, say, the e-discovery and compliance center in looking at Microsoft, and then also OneTrust and some other privacy technologies. But it does have then I wanted to include it for then really showcasing what it does have with just coming out this month for especially those of you at organizations that do have Microsoft. And if you haven't spoken to Microsoft or if you work with a third party on kind of your Microsoft implementation and the like, what is in there and some of the possibilities. I have utilized it in terms of kind of testing it out and those items, but not from an actual implementation perspective. So the first one is looking at the location, answering that question where, you have data in SharePoint, Teams, Exchange, and the like. And then it's also then looking at classifying it from an automated perspective. So the example that gave before, that's where, someone is going in and answering questions, generally a business owner and then an IT professional in terms of what security is on it, where maybe the server's located and the like, answering some of those technical questions. But here in Microsoft, for your data that's in 365, there's automated classification. So this example here that I pulled from the environment, it has, you have US Social Security numbers in Exchange, and then also these additional locations, credit card numbers, EU debit card numbers, and the like. So here we're looking at more automation to answer the question of what personal information do we have and where is it located? And it also then has the geographic map as well from where your Microsoft instance is located. So we've kind of moved towards from the manually answering the question to a more automated state within Microsoft. And I will then also say that there are other technologies on the market today that then plug in to other applications, including Microsoft, but others as well, that then go more towards this automated classification of answering then those questions. What personal information do you have? Where is it located? Who has access to it? And the like, for kind of answering those 5 questions we'd looked at. So it's been a lot of changes over the years, and I would say seeing those changes, especially in fairly short order, just smaller number of years as opposed to 20-year time span. Looking at Microsoft just came out this month. So now kind of looking at cookie management, really breaking it down into two pillars. The first one being your cookie preference management. So this is something that I know everyone on this meeting has experienced, and that's you go to a website and you now have that pop-up banner of, do you accept cookies? Do you not? Or do you want to, go to maybe a preference site and say what you do accept and those kinds of things. So how do then organizations create then those banners, get them published to their site, and how do they track the acceptance, the changes, and the like? And then also, there's different consent models based on jurisdiction. Some have opt-in, some have opt-out, and different items whenever it looks at, customers, site visitors, preferences, and managing those. And, how do you then do that based on different geographies? So we're going to take a look at some examples of how then that can be done. But when you're kind of going through kind of your checklist, these are the different items that need to be able to think about. Then you have cookies so that's kind of the management perspective of your site visitor, your customers' preferences. Then you have, from an internal perspective, what cookies do we have on our site and what do they mean? So you need then a mechanism to identify the cookies that are on your site, being able to scan then your domains, categorizing then the cookies. Never have I seen a cookie scan completed where all cookies were categorized. So I think of it as, you have the classification that is automated, and there will be cookies that are known across sites and that will be automatically classified. Then you have those that you'll need to then categorize outside of then the automated scan. So I guess first here on the left has kind of the scanning and categorization. This screenshot here is from OneTrust as well. So it's just where if, OneTrust, you would enter in the domain, and you can, if you have access to OneTrust, if you have an account, you can enter in any domain here, and then you can see automatically classifies those that are strictly necessary cookies, things that relate to performance of the site, things that relate to the function of the site, those kinds of things. And you can see here, this one that was run, there's 21 unknown. There's always going to be some unknown cookies. And it's, the question of, do you need them? Should you have them deleted? But you first have to then, do they need to stay? If they do, what category do they fall under? But you first have to, determine what it is. And so many times, and you'll hear different departments, privacy really is kind of like information security is a whole company. Privacy really see as being the same, both from an internal compliance perspective and answering questions, and then also culturally. But here, with cookies, that spans your privacy professionals, but then also those in marketing that are managing your site and what goes on your site, with really being able to research what those cookies are. And then here, so to kind of answer then the question of managing your site visitors from a banner perspective, and then also what their preferences are, whether it's an opt-in and opt-out item. Here, this is another example of OneTrust, is where you can have access to an application like OneTrust where you can create the banner, and then it will give you then the code. So that's how they all will look a little bit different, but will have kind of a look and feel of the company's website, their same font, all of those items. They're able to create that within OneTrust, have the code that then they publish to their site so that you see that banner whenever it comes up. But then OneTrust then, because it's connected then with the site, has then, if you click on the preference center and the like, it feeds right back then into OneTrust with what the preferences are. So if you then want, you know, to receive you want to receive information about sessions and discounts and the like, but you don't want all marketing materials, those kinds of things, then an organization is able to then track that through a system similar to OneTrust. So data, I'm going to pause here for a minute. I don't see any questions. So data subject rights, there's a lot of them. They vary on kind of geographic jurisdiction, but in looking at from an operational perspective as it relates to data and data subject rights, DSAR, you'll hear that acronym said, is the first thing that comes to mind. And that's where a data subject has asked for access to, you know, what personal information of mine do you have? Or it could go as far, depending on the jurisdiction, asking for a deletion request. So how does then a corporation approach that? Really, you know, having to know what information they have and where, because, you know, many regulations have very short timeframes for complying with these requests. So like everything, need to have then a defined process. So have here, you know, 5 kind of, not every detailed item to include in the checklist, but really 5 overarching items. The first one being, where are folks going to put in a request? So one place is the use of a web form. See quite a bit where that can be. And then once someone completes a web form or they ask for the request another way, how do you then integrate that with your internal systems? Who's going to then complete those requests? Are they going to know where the data is located? What are kind of all of the different team members that need to be involved? Is it one person that can complete it for your organization, or do you need multiple? And then there's different communication points that you have to provide to the data subject. How are you going to do that? Are you going to have templates for those employees to send in the same responses each time to a data subject and have that standardization? So looking at just, and then how, you know, you want to eventually get to where you've able to note a request as processed and completed, so that it's not remaining open past then that time frame. And then, you know, tracking the date that you received that request and the date then that it was completed. And so I'll say, whenever you're then looking at completing these different requests, mainly see the workflow distinctions based on who the data subject is. Is it a customer or is it an employee? And would say then here have 3 reasons as to really why you want to make then that distinction. The first one being what data is stored. An organization that does business with, I would say, individual customers, so not necessarily a B2B organization, but if you're looking at then an organization that has both employees and then individual customers as opposed to business customers, the data that is stored is very different and in different locations for a customer versus an employee. You know, an employee's data is also going to include email, and ACEDS and e-discovery, everyone is probably very familiar with email and how voluminous that can get. So that the amount of data for an employee is much greater than your customer data. Your customer data would tend to be much more narrow with then especially the sources of the data and then the amount of that data. And so again, I think everyone here would appreciate then that the redactions for that personal information is much more with an employee data, so that if someone asks what information you have, please provide me all of that, and you need to perform redactions for personal information. With a customer, it's a much narrower set of redactions to complete and amount of them, whereas employees, it's much greater, and it's a much greater set of redactions for a data subject access request with a privacy regulation than e-discovery, where you have a litigation and an obligation to provide information, and so what is redacted from a confidentiality perspective is much different than what is redacted from a privacy perspective, because not all employees then had asked for certain information to then be provided. It's not a requirement from a litigation court and the like. So definitely see much more redactions on data subject requests with employee data than even in e-discovery. So you kind of have those bifurcated workflows, and would say from an employee perspective, it is where what you think of as a more traditional e-discovery process tends to be followed with automated tools like Blackout and other tools that have automated redactions in them on a large scale. And looking at then some of the privacy specific workflow items, the example here on the left is creating a web form design. Included here, kind of the Epiq logo. This isn't our corporate one, but just kind of a demo environment for whenever we're showing folks OneTrust. Your web form design very much would still have the look and feel of your website as well, and you can incorporate all of those items within OneTrust. You can edit then what questions you're asking. One of them is, is this an employee, customer, kind of those different items. And so you can create then your web form, publish it to your site, and then it's the same place then that once someone goes to the site, creates the form similar to their cookie preferences, it automatically goes into an internal system that your privacy team can then work to complete. And then you can develop specific workflows. So would say an example here is I've worked within a global organization that sells to businesses, sells to individual customers, has employees worldwide, technology then company. And one thing when you're looking then at an organization of that size, they're going to have various team members that are completing requests, and so the development of workflows can be very complicated. 3 regulations that came up for compliance at one point with them was GDPR, CCPA in California, and then LGPD in Brazil. So they, having different workflows for different geographies that are then compounded with, for the Brazil team, the workflow language need to be in Portuguese and the like. So you can then, within these systems, create very custom workflows based on jurisdictional requirements, but then also what team members, you're going to have different team members completing a request in Brazil than you do in France and California, Canada, and the like, being able to then have a place from at least a privacy program manager perspective of, trying to manage it then on a lot of times a global scale. Data subject requests are also in Microsoft. So you can see here in the middle where it says progress, that's kind of looking at the different workflows that, can also be set up in OneTrust. OneTrust is something that's more customized, whereas those of you who have utilized Microsoft Compliance Center and maybe other areas, if not yet, in privacy, know that it's very much of choosing kind of, the items that are in the drop down, working kind of within their main workflow items. So not as much customization, but it's where then you can especially answer the questions of what data you have for a particular individual data subject and where it's located and the like for completing those. That's within Microsoft then. And it then has the tracking information too as to when it was requested. Deadlines are even automated. Like OneTrust and other organizations have, hundreds of people that are keeping up with privacy regulations and what then the different deadlines are. This one is 30 days, this one's 10 days, and the like, to then automate. A request has come in, it's from, this location, that then means you have 20 days to complete it, and that deadline then is in there. So there are, different ways to try to aid in navigating the complicated, fragmented privacy state that we're in. So training and awareness. This one I want to talk about just very briefly, mainly because it's very similar from an operational perspective as information security training. I'm sure I'm not alone in, it's kind of that time of year and with folks completing compliance training, annual compliance training for the year. And so you are then, training your employees on at least an annual basis in, information security and also then privacy. You want to leverage privacy incidents. So the same way that an information security team would leverage, real-time incidents, you would do so in privacy as well. Vendor risk management, just like how it comes up in other areas, very much comes up in privacy, in knowing once you send data that contains your employee or your customer personal information, what then does that vendor do with it? They are held then to the standards that you are in terms of privacy. And then, from, the collector's perspective, needing to then know what measures they have in place. What are they then, what are the confines that they have for utilizing then that data? And just like every program, you need to have continuous improvement, but I say a metric-based continuous improvement. One item is tracking your privacy incidents, just like, organizations give the phishing tests where throughout the year, the employees will get, kind of random phishing emails that are from InfoSec, and they are tracking then the number of employees that are clicking on those, doing additional training then with them. But then they utilize those metrics because they want to see that number going down over time. They want to confirm that their training is effective, that fewer people are clicking on those phishing emails. It's like that as well with privacy. You want to be able to track that you are having fewer privacy incidents over time. And again, recognizing that incidents are different than breaches. So then whenever it comes to protecting then that personal information, you have in here your information security controls. So your, encryption, all of those different items that your CISO and information security team put in place. that then to protect then personal information from a privacy perspective, what you will hear and see throughout different privacy regulations and commentary is privacy by design. So this is where I view it as really, think of it this way, like privacy by design, you have that from a technology perspective. Let's say you are an application developer. Well, you want to have privacy in mind at that design stage of developing the application. You really want to make sure you're keeping your customer personal information safe, secure, and the like, that you are concerned about privacy even at that design stage. But then it's also about, from a cultural perspective, how information security has really changed and evolved over the years, where it was very much, IT was very focused on what security parameters do you have in place, but then really saw then over the years, it's also a cultural item that all employees really needed to care about. Training programs have evolved and gotten more robust and the like. So, think of then that privacy by design as a cultural item as well, where you want your entire team to care about protecting personal information and the like. So this is from IAPP's text on principles of privacy, their privacy management. They have a textbook on privacy program management, and so this is their principles of privacy by design. So you want to look at it then from that proactive stage, but then also from then having respect for the users. And that's where I think it really comes to be kind of a cultural type item. And then you want to have then that visibility and transparency that is what you'll see then with data subject access requests. If someone says, what personal information do you have about me, you're being then transparent in that regard, but also then with obviously your privacy policies as well, being transparent in that regard with your notice. And one thing that I meant to mention with the training and awareness, there are technologies that are focused on privacy, but I didn't include it in here because it is so similar to information security that organizations tended to already have training and awareness programs in that regard, and they added privacy then to that, where there's an additional kind of module and the like for privacy from a content perspective. But if you don't have one in place, but you need one from a privacy perspective, there are technologies out there that are focused on privacy. Okay, so the dreaded phrase of a data breach and kind of planning for if and when that happens. There's a lot that goes into it, but again, kind of just looking at the flow of it, the first thing is you want to make sure you have an incident response plan. You don't want to be in the situation of looking at a potential breach and not having then a plan in place, because you want to make sure, one thing is you want to make sure you have a process for employees to report incidents, whether that's them clicking on a phishing email or, back in the day, someone came into an office behind them, or they emailed, a customer's data to the wrong person, or if you're a healthcare organization, you gave, someone's prescription to the wrong person, you got them then mixed up. So what's the process for employees to report then those incidents? What's your workflow then internally for responding to those incidents? Once it's reported, you want to investigate it, you want to remediate it, and then what are the notification requirements? And then knowing that there are generally jurisdictional legal requirements for when that notification has to occur, which could also then be where, especially from a business to business perspective with data breach planning, you could have a contractual obligation that as well for notifying clients. So again, that is very, very high level. But whenever you look at then how you can do that, again, want to try to showcase that it doesn't have to be as inundated, or scary as it can sound. And that's just kind of with there being different technologies on the market kind of today. There definitely are organizations that are still handling these kinds of things in, say, Microsoft Excel, email, and the like. Think of it as kind of like a legal hold. If someone's notifying employees of a legal hold, some folks are still tracking that in Excel, emailing in Outlook. That doesn't mean that that's not acceptable, but and defensible, but on a larger scale for some organizations, it wouldn't be manageable. So similar to how there are technologies that folks are probably familiar with from a legal hold perspective in performing notifications, interacting then with custodians, there are things like that as well with interacting with data subjects, creating then templates for communicating with them. And in this regard, tracking incidents. You can have then within an employee portal, a place that an employee can log in and submit an incident that occurred. It then feeds into an internal system. These are OneTrust screenshots again. And then it goes then through the workflows of investigating it. What happened? What do we have to do to remediate? Is this something that is goes to something larger that need to then, do additional training for all employees and the like? And then how do you then notify those affected? So similar to kind of how we looked at OneTrust and Microsoft before as examples, those things work similarly here for data breach incidents as well, with kind of creating then the form and the like. So now we're to the kind of final monitoring and auditing. You're exhausted with building out your program and the like, and it felt like it took forever, but you really want to make sure you are continuously monitoring and auditing it. And we'll say, it is hard with keeping up with not only the privacy regulatory landscape, but then all the other changes that just happen from a data perspective of, your different groups internally that are, onboarding new third-party applications, continuously developing new applications and the like. So it can be quite a bit. But here, one thing that Microsoft has in its privacy module that again just came out this month from a general availability perspective is really these 4 pillars. And I think they're exceptionally applicable for outside of your Microsoft environment, but Microsoft does have some automated policies within it. So I wanted to utilize it for kind of showcasing how you can do this kind of in the real world. One area you want to look at is data overexposure. Whenever you've looked at what personal information you have and where, who has access to it, and is it where this personal information is overexposed in that it may not have enough security in it for what it is. It's a social security number, it's credit card financial information, it's PHI, or is it, a name and address, those kinds of things. So what security do you have on it? But then also, who has access to it? Does everyone who have access to it really need access to it from a business perspective, or can you reduce that? Data transfers, we looked at then that cross-border map. Well, one thing you can do in Microsoft is you can set up a policy so that it's prevented where an employee sitting in one country can't then email or, transfer through another application, certain information to an employee in another region? Do you want to place that prevention automatically within it or across departments? So these are things like everything, whenever it comes to controls, it's the balance of finding, they still, employees still need to be able to conduct their day-to-day business obligations. So what is the appropriate balance then for your organization, for your different departments and groups? Is there a business need in some of these regards? Because you don't want the controls to be so much that then they're not able to fulfill their business obligations and requirements. And then, of course, data minimization. So one thing we didn't talk about is pseudonymization and anonymizing data. You'll hear those two items quite a bit with privacy. Anonymizing it is putting things into like categories and buckets, ages 18 to 25, things like that. Other is, placing, like security keys is an example. If you did have a breach, someone would get into your system, something along those lines, they wouldn't actually be able to get anything out of it. So there's those options. But then here, data minimization is looking at actually deleting personal data. So if you have personal data from a customer that's not used anymore, it's not old, this person was maybe a former customer or the like, can you then identify that and delete it? So this aids in your continuous data reduction items from a retention purpose. And then Microsoft does have a place where you can create custom policies. I would say if you are starting out with utilizing the privacy module in Microsoft or any other technology, start with what is already there before going further. Because we'll say in testing and looking at this with some of the folks at Microsoft before it went to general availability, whenever they were kind of still testing it out with certain customers and the like, and utilizing it kind of ourselves in kind of testing it out. You can get a lot at once. Think of it as, you get kind of Microsoft daily alerts now and the like. You will be surprised at then what you see every organization. I'm sure those that work in e-discovery day to day, how many times I've heard a client say, oh, no, we have, corporate policies in place where our employees know they're not to email this data or they're not to send this data to anyone within the organization or outside. But then, you have a large data collection for e-discovery purposes, and you find then that kind of information that was emailed. Someone exported it out of an internal system and sent it to someone, those kinds of things that internally, but then it's an email, and that could be, a customer's credit card information or otherwise personal data. So do you have any that is overexposed? And looking at those alerts, like start with those that are already created and work your way through those before look at starting to really customize it, and how do you then need to change it. So I know that we're about 5 minutes to the top of the hour, and I've spoken a lot. So if you're still here, thank you. I hope it hasn't been too much hearing one voice. And I just saw a chat come in for a customer that is no longer a customer. So this question is, I think everyone has access to the chat, but just in case not, if you have a customer that's no longer a customer, does that customer data fall into the data retention schedule, or can that data just be deleted? So I don't want to answer this question definitively, mainly because one, what's the data kind of purpose of it, and what did that customer agree to when they gave their data? And that's mainly because I will say there's so many organizations that then share our data with one another, and then that's even the part of their business practice is that data sharing, that they may not want to delete it. They may have then another purpose in retaining it, and that could be, you know, their marketing aspects. They want to then know where we've clicked, if they are legally able to retain that information, so that then they can market then those items to us and continue to. So yeah, believe it's going to fall into the industry that the organization is in and what locations they do business in are located. So very much true, and gave kind of that example of while an organization may be able to delete it, they may not necessarily want to. So it also depends then on kind of what their intentions are with the data and what they are able to retain, if they can retain it. Yep, you're welcome. And I will say too, because this is very true for people who know me and have worked with me, I very much think of questions after meetings and sessions. So with that, if you do think of them afterwards, you can always feel free to reach out. And I will also admit I am a person who does, because I sometimes, it's like I walk out of a meeting 5 minutes later, think of a question or something about it, or the next day. So feel free to do so.
Great. Well, sorry, go ahead, Trina.
No, I was just about to say, I don't know if there's closing remarks.
Yeah, I was just going to thank everybody for attending today, and if there are no more questions, then we can end the meeting. But like Trina said, feel free to reach out if you do have questions, and you should receive a copy of the presentation as well. Thank you, everyone.